Welcome to Inflection Point Podcast, where we cultivate change from the inside out as we ponder the Cairo question. Will Cairo have to protest in his lifetime for the birthright to freely and peacefully exist in the skin in which he was born? We stand on the belief that dismantling racism goes beyond laws and legislation or politics and economics. Here, anti-racism activation is presented as an inside job where personal transformation and accountability impact social change. So take a seat at the anti-racism activation table with Inflection Point Podcast.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the newest episode of Inflection Point Podcast. I am your host, Anita Russell, and here's a quick hello from Gail and Mavis.
After you, Gail.
Okay. Hi, I'm Gail Hunter, and welcome to our show this evening.
Yes, I'm Mavis Bauman. Welcome.
Yes, so if you had seen one of our previous episodes, as a matter of fact, it was the last episode that we did in the month of December, on December the 21st, and we had a really, really special guest that was on. She's a very dear friend of both mine and Mavis's, going back years, and quite frankly. And Gail had the opportunity to meet her when we were preparing for that particular episode. But today's episode is actually a tribute to that same individual. Over the last couple of weeks or so, Mavis and I found out that she had been killed in South Africa. And so it just really brought a lot of memories. I met Phangisile probably back in like 2000 or so. And we decided that we wanted to do this particular episode as a tribute to her life, everything that she did, what she represented. She was, in fact, the epitome, if you will, of a global citizen. And so just to give you a real recap of what we talked about when Phangisile was here the last time, and then we'll kind of get into what we really want to talk about here. We did a number of episodes where we were looking at the plight of Black farmers. And we looked at the plight of Black farmers in the United States, looking at it from a racial perspective as well as looking at it from a historical perspective. And we had an individual from Syracuse, New York, who came on as our guest. It was a woman who is engaged in urban farming in, I'm sorry, not Syracuse, Rochester, New York. She's engaged in urban farming. And so we thought it would be a really great idea to have Phangisile come on, because in addition to everything that she has done from a corporate perspective, from a philanthropic perspective, former journalist and all of that, she was also a farmer, a generational farmer. And so we brought her in and had a really in-depth conversation, looking at things through the same lens, that lens of being a Black farmer, and also looking at it from a historical perspective. In the United States, we're looking at it through that racism lens. In South Africa, we're looking at it through the apartheid lens. The names are different, but they're very much the same. And so we had her come on as a Black female farmer in South Africa. And so I just wanted to give our audience a little bit of background on who she was and what we talked about in that previous show. But what we want to do here is talk about her life in a much fuller kind of way. She touched people all over the world. And we're going to give you a little bit of insight into how we came to know Phangisile Mtshali and how that relationship grew over the course of time, work that we did together and all of that. So I'm going to have Mavis and Gail, if you wanted to comment before we go a little bit further, particularly you, Gail, because you just met Phangisile.
Mhm. And she was just an incredible human being. I mean, she was brilliant, but she was very down to earth, very genuine. I mean, she was just a picture of what we all could achieve if we could open up to our own hearts and our own truths. So I was just grateful to be able to have that experience of meeting with her those 2 times. And I really regret that I'm not going to be able to. And it's just horrific what happened to her, and sad for the whole world, I mean, for her family, certainly, and friends. And so for you and Mavis, I know how deeply this must be really saddening your heart. And then the loss is tremendous. But I feel loss for me too, because the potential of what I believe was going to continue to occur was a connection that I felt very strongly about. That was just amazing.
Yeah, because when she was here, we actually talked about
Right.
going to South Africa again.
I know. Yes,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yes,
Yeah.
Mavis?
Yeah, I hate to let go of that dream of going back there. She was so full of light and energy. And, her life started on the farm. And she went through periods of poverty when their family farm was confiscated by the government. And she remembered it. She didn't live as a bitter person. She went back to the place where people who suffer from poverty or poor health, whatever it was, to bring them back along with her. And I will never forget how she just became like someone on my personal Mount Rushmore, just somebody to just admire and hold yourself to. I want to be like that. I want to give in the world like that. I want to be humble and loving like she was. Yeah. It's just awful to use the past tense. She still is, really. She's still alive in so many people. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's pretty much verified if you look at all the different posts and things like that that have come across. So she was killed on January the 4th. And the way Mavis and I found out was really via social media. Mavis is the one that picked it up and initially saw it on Facebook. And it's just very difficult for me to explain the explosion of emotions that I had when I heard that news. And I just kept saying to myself, but we just talked to her.
Yeah.
We just talked to her, what, like 2 weeks prior? Just 2 weeks. We had just talked to her. And so it was a very solemn moment, a very grieving moment for me. Yeah, but we're here to pay tribute to Phangisile in terms of what her life was all about. So this is her story of beyond farming. So if you saw that previous episode, that was primarily what she talked about, was her life as a farmer. But what we want to do is take you much deeper into who she was as an individual, who she was as a human being. So when you hear the word global citizens, if we just kind of start there, when you hear the word global citizen, like, what does that mean to you, Mavis and Gail? What does it mean to you? I know what it means to me, but I'd like to hear, what does it mean to you when you hear the word global citizen?
To me, it means somebody that can see that collectively we're all just one humanity, that we are one human race, and that she lived her life with that core belief and treated everybody with respect and dignity and love and interest. And from what I've read and from what I experienced with her, I think that's what that means to me.
I think you have a quote coming up later, don't you, Anita, about how she felt about when she went to various areas of the world, about listening to people and, to help them solve their problems. So I don't want to cut into that. But as a global citizen, to me, I think she could change environments more easily than anyone I ever knew. And I didn't know her that well, I have to be honest. We were friends since we went on the trip in 2008. Not often, but I, watched her from afar. Thank heavens for social media in that regard. But even when you meet her, you feel like she's a family member immediately. She doesn't take a lot of time to become familiar. Let's get to work. Let's laugh. Let's eat. And then she had all this brilliance behind this friendliness. Again, I think she could just fit into any environment around the world and make it better.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Those types of things are certainly the way that I see a global citizen as well. But I also see it from the standpoint of transcendence, just sort of transcending what we normally experience on a daily basis, if you will, in terms of, like, if you think about global citizenry in the context of what our show is all about. Our show is all about reckoning with racism, if you will, anti-racism activation and that sort of thing. And when you think about life within that context, it's very divisive. We're very divided up. So for there to be a human being, and she's not the first human being who has been like this. I mean, I often think about Phangisile as like a Mother Teresa of modern day, and not so much from that deeply spiritual. That's not to say that Phangisile was not spiritual, because she certainly was, but just in terms of how a person can have the capacity to look at every single individual and recognize their right to exist.
Their value.
And whatever their conditions are, their value, what have you. But at the same time, recognizing that you can play a role in helping people to get to a better place in terms of how they want to live. Right? I want to be in a better place. And just being able to look at that and look at humanity in that way, I think is a gift. It's a tremendous gift. And Phangisile definitely embodied all of that. So
and she had the ability to bring change to that environment.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I mean, I've been to a number of places where my heart is laid out. And I never had the way that she thought about things. I think the way that she organized them in her mind and said, we can do this, and this is the way we're going to do it. And, developed models, I guess, that were so adaptable around the world.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a special mind.
It's like she had a belief that no matter what she saw was a possibility, she knew she could go in there and support and facilitate that change in that environment to support the people that she was working with. It just is like this. There wasn't even determination. It was just more of a knowing that she knew she would. That's what was going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I never knew Phangisile because I know years ago she was also a journalist.
Mm-hmm.
I never knew her as a journalist. But at the same time, I can see how that played a role in molding who she is, right, and what she developed into, and the things that she had the potential to do, and how she could bring out that potential in everybody around her, literally everybody around her. She could bring that potential out. So what I'd like us to do is maybe shift our conversation just a bit and talk about particularly you, Mavis, and I, how we really got to know Phangisile, right? And so it all came about because we worked at the same pharmaceutical company. We met one another at that company. At the time, I was heading up an organization within the company called the Center for Science Education. That was kind of my day job within the corporation, but I also was leading the African American Affinity Group. Well, that's what it was called then. That's certainly isn't what the name is now. It's evolved into a much more in-depth kind of, I think is Black Organizational Learning and Development, I think is what, so it's the acronym is BOLD.
Wow.
But at the time it was called the African American Affinity Group. And I, at the time, was the chair of that group. And I can remember one particular day, I was sitting in my office and I got a phone call. I got a phone call from the gentleman who is the president of this company's foundation, of the company foundation. And this was an individual that I had also had the chance to work with and know over the course of years with a lot of the stuff that I was doing in terms of volunteer work and just different things like that. So it enabled me to kind of have a reach beyond like just my role. So I, kind of hung out with the executives quite a bit and all that. And so I got to know this gentleman, and what he was asking me or proposing is that the company had created a program called Secure the Future in response to the AIDS epidemic, right? And this was going back to, I want to say like 1999, 2000 or so, somewhere in that, where they were started this program called Secure the Future. And it was an amazing program, a landmark kind of program, in that the approach that was taken was much more from the perspective of community, right? So it wasn't legislative. It was just kind of like, how do we manage these disease states by working with people on the ground in the community, medical professionals, all of that as well, but individuals that are in the community. And I think that was for me, that was the thing that really drove the work that we ultimately did with Phangisile, right? Because it was very community driven and that. And so, of course, I said yes. Like, who would say no to that, right? And so we embarked on this journey to create this program, a breast cancer awareness program in South Africa, specifically targeting women. Okay, and the name of the program was Wise Ed. And I'm going to see if I can make myself remember what that stands for, because that name is really, really important. So I may have to pull it up and come back to it a little bit later. Because it was so long ago, I always end up losing track of what that acronym actually is.
Yeah, I don't remember either.
Yeah, so
many organization names at that time. Do you remember giggling over that, Anita?
Yeah, I got it though. I just pulled it up.
Oh, good. Oh, good.
So it's Wise Ed, WISE-ED, and it stands for Women Informed of Self-Examination and Early Detection. And so the program was really about building that awareness of how self-examination, breast self-examination, and that early detection plays a key role in how well a person is able to recover from having breast cancer. And so we got together and we just started working towards creating this program from scratch, because they basically said, what we want to do is, when we, built the program, the Secure the Future program was built around the HIV HIV work. And so the whole entire point of this program, this new program, Wise Ed, was to test that model, that HIV secure the future model, in a different disease state. And so the work that we did ended up being really almost landmark kind of work, because it demonstrated that, yes, the secure the future model can indeed be applied to certain other disease states. And it was at that point, it wasn't at that point that I met Phangisile, but it was at that point where we began to work together. And so we worked very closely together to build this program out and to get the right people involved. It was an oncology project, so we ended up getting people from the oncology group to be involved in helping us to put the program together. And ultimately, as we were pulling everything together, we were given permission, if you will, to hire a photographer. And so that's how Mavis ended up being a part of this program and everything. And so it was just an amazing transformation, if you will, as multiple individuals. So on my team, there were a number of us that were on the team from the African American Affinity Group as we were working towards planning it out. And it wasn't easy. There were lots of complications that we had to figure out how we were going to do this, because obviously the company can't just give employees money to run off to South Africa and implement a program, you know. And so we had to be very wise and very clever in terms of how we had to raise the money on our own and all of that. But just when I look back on that and the role that Phangisile made, and I want to share a story with you. And then Mavis, I want you to share some of your experience as we were building up towards going to South Africa. But this one particular day, so I mentioned previously that we had to raise the money, right? And so we did a number of, we created what we called the I Promise campaign. And that the I Promise campaign was designed for us to, through employees, to get donations into this particular program. We ended up having to partner with an external organization, a nonprofit organization, right? And so we were able to get employees to make their donations through the foundation to this particular nonprofit. And because they were doing it through that mechanism, we were able to get a match. And so we ended up raising $10,000, but with the match, we had $20,000, which was exactly the amount of money that we needed to cover our expenses to go on the trip. So there were 6 of us, I believe, that traveled together. And then we also had to buy the breast models so that people would have the opportunity to kind of practice feeling for lumps and things like that. So it became a very critical part of our learning arsenal, if you will. And but this one particular day, we had an event in the cafeteria. And so it was a company-wide kind of event. And Phangisile was there. But Phangisile walked in full Zulu garb. It was the most amazing, beautiful presence of a woman one of them that I have seen in my life. And the way she walked in, number one, she got everybody's attention. And number two, she started speaking. And when she started speaking, people were mesmerized. Like, I'm just looking at everybody, including myself, and we're hanging on to every single word that is coming out of her mouth. She started off with a poem. And I don't remember what the poem was, but I just remember her starting off with a poem and then kind of going into the message as to why this work was so incredibly important for us to be doing. So that's one of the images that always sticks with me when I think about Phangisile and how she made that grand entrance into our fundraising event. And she was just captivating. So Mavis, we're going to get ready to take a break in a few minutes, but if you could just at least start your conversation a little bit, but I might have to flag you and we can continue it after the break.
Actually, I can tell kind of a short story that
okay.
I told my team here that I journaled while I was there and took some notes. And I wanted to share with you, Anita, that you said, this is the best moment of my life. And I wrote that down. And you've said that many times since, but I didn't remember, documenting that. When we were all together on the flight, going from Newark to Johannesburg, it was like 18 or 20 hours. It looks like we stopped in a couple of places, but I don't recall ever deplaning. But if you know me, you know that I'm very claustrophobic. And now the world is going to know. But for me, on a 20-hour flight, to go into that airplane bathroom is the worst. And I just can't do it. Well, I was looking in my journal and it said, Phangisile held the door for me so I wouldn't have to lock it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's who she was, that humble. And that, she noticed that I was stressed. I don't remember exactly how it went down, but the way those bathrooms feel just terrified me. And I just knew I was in such great hands. So that was one of my first exposures to her, aside from the rush at the airport and getting all those boxes.
Oh my God.
At the last minute.
Thank God Phangisile was with us though. Because remember, they were holding us up. They were holding up the boxes and everything. And Phangisile went and said something to
She said something.
She said something. And next thing I know, we were rushed through. Yeah.
She's amazing. And she was just so effective and without really offending anybody. She got things done and nobody was afraid of her. Certainly I wasn't. And it was just an amazing experience from minute one. So I guess probably when we come back, I'll talk a little bit more about, how I got into this photography role and what that perspective was like for me then. So do you want to go to a break now then?
Yeah, we're going to take a break now and we'll come back and continue your thought.
Okay, thanks.
So welcome back. You are listening to Inflection Point Podcast on Transformation Talk Radio. And our topic for this episode is tribute to Phangisile Mtshali. So I'm going to pass the baton back to Mavis so she can finish out what she was talking about previously.
Yeah, I'm probably going to wind around here a little bit about Phangisile, but again, I was just so impressed at how she was managing a lot of moving parts for this effort, different sites where you all were doing your presentations, different levels of education. For example, one whole classroom was traditional healers, right? And I remember learning that was one of the first points of entry to teach the traditional healers how to identify breast cancer, because that's where about 85% of the people in the rural areas will go when they have some sort of physical complaint. So what a joy to work with those people. And I think in every room, Phangisile set the tone, right? And every discussion was fascinating. And just what I love about being in the world where people come from such different backgrounds and have such different experiences on the planet. And we just came together in a miraculous way, I think. As a photographer, the beauty of the people, which you will see in some images at some point, their style, their openness to what the group was teaching in a train the trainer method, right? So they were able to multiply out to so many different people in a short period of time in several locations. And boy, Phangisile just kept us rolling. And then, at the end of the trip, took us to, Anita and I were both kind of surprised. We didn't know where we were going, but it was.
Well, none of us knew where we were going. Except
I just don't remember that. Well,
yeah, it was because she didn't tell any of us where we were going. But that's Phangisile. I mean, think about it.
Well, I don't remember wondering so much. I totally submitted to the process.
Right, exactly.
You're in this Jeep and you just go, right?
Right.
And then arriving at this cultural club in KwaZulu-Natal that she had built for her family, to employ her family. And we had the joy of staying there and really being a part of the locale, not as a tourist so much, but we got to be in a family environment and explore the land and climb across rivers. And it was, she just knew how to bring people together, really knew how to bring people together. And I just thought it was interesting in our podcast a couple of weeks ago that she said, in her first comments, in her humility, she said, I want to tell you that your program 10 years on, didn't she say 10 years, was still successful. And so she always, it seemed to me, always made the person that she was speaking to feel lifted and supported. Yeah, I noticed in one of the, statements about her on that kudos board, someone said, you believed in us and you walked with us until your departure. And that describes her as well. So I'm going to leave it at that for a moment. Now, I may think of something else before we go too far.
Okay. So yeah, I actually want to dig a little bit deeper into that whole entire trip, right? And as Mavis mentioned, she was there as the photographer. So she brings a different perspective. I was actually there as one of the leaders and trainers. And so you have to so this was one of the things that I realized as I was preparing for this trip, that I needed to drain myself of certain things that I was used to being in America, working in a corporation, and all of those things. So I literally went through this spiritual process where my purpose of going through that process was to eliminate any possibility of there being something inside of me that would make me not be fully 100% respectful in terms of being in somebody else's space, in their culture, in their language, in their food, and everything. So it was almost like a cleansing, if you will. Yeah. I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't bringing anything with me that could end up being hurtful or harmful, because we knew we were going to be going into the community. So we were not in luxury hotels and all of that. We stayed in a bed and breakfast in Ladysmith, which was nice. But then the work that we did, we were literally in the community. And there's so many different stories, because we were kind of fixing things as we go along. So we went from one location, and this is kind of what I meant when I was alluding to this whole idea of what we get used to in our corporate jobs in America. We have everything that we need basically at our disposal and all of that. At least that was my experience and everything. But, we would go in one place, as an example, and air conditioning. The place is air conditioned and feels not really nice. But then we might go into another place where there was no air conditioning, and we're talking like 70, 80 degrees outside and all of that. So it's very challenging for me to be able to walk amongst people and to just simply meet them where they are. And whatever we needed to do, whatever extra stuff we needed to do, we made it happen. Like us working with the community members, we made it happen. And one of the things that I really, really remember about that trip is how often people would tell us how grateful they were.
Yes.
That we came all the way from the United States to be here with them, to help them, to teach them something new and something different. So it was amazingly gratifying for me. So one of the funny stories, and then Gail, I want you to have the opportunity to just kind of add your comments. But one of the funny stories is, if you remember, Mavis, we were at that one place and it was like a big community center and it didn't have any electricity.
I was going to say, I remember extension cords back to New Jersey.
And I don't know, somebody in their home over there that had electricity had the longest extension cord I've ever seen in my life. And it went all the way from their home into that place so that we had the electricity that we needed to do our work. To me, that was so amazing. Such an amazing example of what we can do when we make a decision that we're going to work together in community.
Absolutely. So
true. Yeah, that's like one of the things that I just remember. And it was one of those orange heavy duty extension cords.
Extension cords.
And I was just like, how long is this thing? But it was just amazing. You know, somebody said, well, my friend over there has electricity. Let's go see if he would help us. And next thing you know, we got the power that we need.
And everybody was cool. Everybody was cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there were just no expectations. I think it was that day I saw a note. We ate sandwiches and orange juice out of the trunk of a car. Do you remember those little sandwiches we had at every meal? Didn't matter, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, think of how corporations could save money and invest it elsewhere when, you know, they have all these elegant, you know, displays for any meeting. But boy, it was just, we were just on the earth with them, totally.
Right, exactly. So Mavis, I mean, I'm sorry, Gail, I'd like you to, I know none of this is a part of your experience, but just as you're hearing us talk about it and, you know, knowing what you do know in terms of having met Phangisile at least at one time.
Well, it's what's fascinating listening to you is and just having met her briefly, I mean, she could communicate and relate to almost anybody, as I think what you've been describing, right? But she also helped both of you get to that place of feeling comfortable in maybe an unfamiliar experience, right? And so drinking orange juice and eating sandwiches out of a backseat of a truck or whatever became the norm, and that was okay. And finding electricity down by somebody else's house who had it with a long extension. I mean, those are just all things that were being adapted, and as if nothing was wrong with that. Nothing was different, right? And the real purpose of what you were doing there was always shining through. Yeah.
Exactly. Because it was what we were there for was never hindered. Never hindered.
It wasn't.
Right.
Not at all. Not at all. It was always a way that, you know, talking with the folks and everything, that they came up with a solution, and it always worked. Whatever that thing was, it always worked for us.
Wow.
So
a little bit more slowly than we were used to, but
actually, we came there prepared that there may be some places where we did not have electricity at all. So if you remember, Mavis, we used our own bodies. There were, and that was what our plan was.
Oh, yes, you did.
That we would use our own bodies because we had the computer with the, you know, the images and all of that. But in those instances where we didn't have electricity, we had already pre-planned how we were going to manage that. Yep, how we were going to manage that. And
I have photographs of you guys demonstrating.
Yeah, that was why. In any photograph that you see where we were doing that, it was mainly because we couldn't use the computer.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah,
You met everyone where they were, which they didn't have computers, I'm sure, and
exactly.
you didn't need the meter at that point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I'm sorry.
I was just going to say earlier, Anita, before I forget it, that I had that Mom Noma said, you were saying how welcoming they were and everything. She said, you came and you know, how important it was that you came and you brought your hearts.
Yes. Yes.
Doesn't that just sound like her? You know, it was, it wasn't a competition on any level. And I don't know, do you want me to go into the piece about how it relates to what we're doing now a little bit?
No, I want to finish.
I'm going
to make another comment about this.
Okay.
So the outcome of the work that we did,
of course,
we were there over the course of a week, right? And not even like a full 7 days. The work that we did was jammed into these 5 days. So it was Monday through Friday. And the last day was actually, if I'm recalling correctly, Mavis, the last day was the day when we had the big party.
It was
celebration.
I just saw that
big celebration. But
I had we flew out that night then.
No, because from there we went to
Durban or something.
Puggy's place.
Oh, okay.
Right. From the community, the big community event, we went to Puggy's place, right? We went straight to Puggy's place from there. And then the next day we were in Durban. And we were leaving, but we were leaving on a later flight. So we were able to go hang out in Durban before we had to get to the airport.
Gotcha.
Right?
Gotcha.
But the point I wanted to make is in that span of 5 days, we trained a total of almost 400 people. It was exactly 394 community members in 5 days.
Wow.
And part of that was because we prepared for approximately 25 to 30 people per session, right? But we started, as was mentioned earlier, we started with the traditional healers. And by the time the week was rolling around, the message was getting around, come and hear what these people are doing and hear what they're talking about and see what they're doing. And so towards the end of the week, we would have like 45 to 50 people in one training session. That's how we were able to hit that number of 394. Amazing. So it's the power of that spoken word or that individual word, that the word just spread. It just spread. And every time, every day, it just seemed like, oh, wow, we got more people than we had yesterday. We got more people. And every day we just did what we needed to do in order to make it work. In spite of some of the challenges that we had talked about earlier. And the celebration, oh my gosh, it was a big white tent that we were in. And remember the little girls were singing. They sang a song.
Sure.
And then they had the older boys that did a show, right? And then we were dancing, and it was just a beautiful, beautiful way to end the work that we had done. And then from there, we went over to Puggy's place. So what is it that you wanted to share, Mavis?
Well, just to zoom out on what we're doing in Inflection Point and how this experience in South Africa shaped us, knowing Phangisile shaped us. It's really what we're trying to do with Inflection Point is to get rid of the whole concept of race, really, to just see each other as fully human and fully valuable. Each individual, every life is valuable. And when you are challenged by going to a place that's so different from what you know, and you look into the eyes of someone so different from you,
Right.
and I always feel like laughter is just a major connector. That's a piece of that truth coming up, right? Who we are. And I think that Phangisile work is going to be echoed in what we're doing.
Mhm.
And her work is going to be echoed around the world. I compared her to Martin Luther King today, that so many people are grieving the loss of her in Africa for sure, and around the world, all the places she touched.
Mhm.
And it's just, I just feel honored that she touched my life.
Mhm.
And Inflection Point, we were over the moon that she was going to be on our podcast.
Yeah.
She was a
Exactly.
VIP, right?
Exactly.
I was grateful just to finally meet her because you talked so much about her, and she was
Right,
more
right.
than what you talked about instead.
Just
I
such
was
a
grateful to have had that
dear
opportunity.
woman. I wished I could sit at her feet and just listen for hours. Just listen for
Wow.
hours and hours and hours.
Her
Mm.
wisdom.
Yeah.
So I'm
Yeah.
glad you actually brought that up, because another tie into the work that Phangisile does is that Phangisile was a very grassroots
Mhm.
minded individual. And
Mhm.
that's how I look at anti-racism activation. I look at that as a grassroots, bottom up
Mhm.
movement of humanity, if you will. And when I think about Phangisile, I could honestly say that perhaps my knowing her was influential in how I even created this whole Inflection Point podcast and its connection to anti-racism activation, because I saw and experienced this individual that was grassroots no matter where she went.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
No
Right.
matter where she
Grassroots
went.
everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so all of that is her just emerging as a global citizen
Yes.
herself. But then when I think about what we're doing, perhaps that's what we're doing, is creating global citizens through anti-racism activation.
Certainly, it's a big, big piece of it.
Yes.
A big,
Yeah.
big piece.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want me to mention what I talked about earlier today about trauma.
Yes,
I've done a
yes.
lot of work in my career with trauma, and there are different approaches. Some call it the top-down approach, which you start with your mind and the cognitive thoughts, and then you try to work on healing from there. But there's a bottom-up approach, and it's like from the root up, and that's in the body. And so what Phangisile represented was just what you described. And I've always believed that racism, and you have said, is an inside job. It has to begin within each of us, right? And we can't just think about it. We have to feel it. We have to experience it. We have to really get in touch with our own core and our own core belief systems in order to transform our own perceptions and beliefs and our behavior in order to become more that global citizen, right? In order to experience that collectively, globally, that we really have to heal from within. And it has to come from within ourselves, from everything that is held in our body that has been generationally transferred to us from one generation to another, that we have to recognize where that lives still within us and begin to make those changes and ground ourselves in what is true. And Phangisile just was there, right? She was the epitome of that, in truth. No matter who you were, she could see who the other person was. She saw the truth of who they were, and that we were all in the human race.
Exactly.
Here's another thing that I noted that Phangisile said: even if we only touch and save one life, it's a life worth saving.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I just see so much of her reflected in how I've been determined to move forward with my work, in Rwanda and with the podcast and so on. So yeah, it was heavy duty, impressing experience.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I actually have a quote from Phangisile, and this is within the context of her work as a corporate philanthropist. When you are approaching communities, do not just focus on the needs. Also, assess the assets that are there. That is that art of listening beyond what you want to seek. Hear what they do not say and hear how they say it in their own language. When I read that quote, it reminded me of Dr. Martin Luther King when he made the statement that riot is the language of the unheard.
Mhm.
And that really speaks volumes in terms of every voice should be valued and heard.
Yes.
And so when I saw those two quotes, I can see the alignment between the two, right?
Mhm. Clearly, yes.
That's just so
Yeah.
gorgeous.
Oh, beautiful.
So
quote.
gorgeous.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mhm.
So if I had to sum her up in 5 words, gratitude, peace, prayer for humanity, and working from the root up.
Mhm. Excellent. Excellent. I found that somebody else had posted this, something similar.
Mhm.
Dedicated, talented advocate and catalyst for change.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So if you could imagine all of the thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people out there whose life was touched by Phangisile,
Right.
and they feel,
Mhm.
you know what I'm saying? They
Yeah.
feel
Yeah.
what she was about and
They
all that
experienced
good
it,
stuff.
yes.
Yeah.
And they
And
would
remember,
have felt heard, and they would have been seen by her.
yes.
Exactly.
And each
Exactly.
person would have known that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I have a closing quote that I'd like to throw out there, and it kind of ties all of this together from a humanitarian perspective. And this quote, Mavis, is from the video, the Netflix video that you were talking about, Mission Joy.
Mhm.
With it's a conversation between the Dalai Lama and Bishop Desmond Tutu, right?
Yes.
Such a
And
beautiful film.
yeah, it's so beautiful. And this is a quote, and it's Dalai Lama speaking of Desmond Tutu, right? I am very, very happy and great honor to talk one of my old friends and a spiritual friend. Now I'm reading it exactly the way, because
In his language, right?
in his way of speaking, exactly.
Right.
So I really happy having this opportunity, although physically there's a difference, but mentally we are always together, right? I always consider you as an ultra spiritual brother. So naturally, now getting older, but your spirit remains generation to generation. I myself see you till my death. I carry your spirit. That's how I feel about Phangisile.
Me too. Me too.
Like I carry her spirit within me. I carry her spirit.
Yes.
So Gail, how is that resonating with you? It looks like that's
Well,
really, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I could just feel that. I do carry her spirit. And if we all could just take and hear and know and remember what she was here to show us all and teach us all.
Yeah. So we're down to probably like 20 seconds at this point. So I want to just say, this is my promise. I promise to carry the spirit of Phangisile within me in the way that I live my life and the work that I do. So for those of you who are listening, I'd recommend that you go back and look at the previous episode that I mentioned, December the 21st, that particular episode where Phangisile was featured as our guest. And I just want to thank you, our audience, for joining us. And we will see you the next time at Inflection Point Podcast right here on Transformation Talk Radio. We are here every first and third Wednesday at 3 p.m. Pacific time and 6 p.m. Eastern time. And we always have something wonderful to talk about. Thank you for listening to Inflection Point Podcast, where our mantra is cultivating change from the inside out. The journey towards anti-racism and social change doesn't stop here. Truth, reconciliation, and healing come from ongoing, open, honest, and deliberate conversations. Continue to dive in and deconstruct your thoughts, ideas, and beliefs as we band together to manifest social change. Tune in to Inflection Point Podcast every first and third Wednesday at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern, here on TransformationTalkRadio.com for more conversations about how we can cultivate change from the inside out.